My name's Mark. It feels I feel a little bit of a frog, dearie, sort of coming after two absolutely fantastic, brilliant speakers. So sort of I hope I live up to the two speakers we've just had. Um, as I said, my name's Mark. I'm from the UK. I'm from Essex. I'd like to introduce you to everyone, and the thing I'd like you to introduce you to is my brain. This is my brain. I use my brain every day. And I normally use it if we were in person speaking. I would be using it to be throwing at you so that you can then, whoever catches it, can ask me questions. So it's a little tool that I always have, but my brain is a squidgy brain. Although, to be perfectly honest, on some days, it works better than the one that's actually in this head here. I was asked to speak about my experiences as everyone else was who's spoken today, and we're all very different. We've all got very different stories. We've all got journeys that we've all been on, which at some respects has been the lowest we possibly ever have got to, and because that's what suicide is. My story begins a long while back. Actually, it begins in around about 2004, and I had a bereavement, and I'd already had my mother die 8 years before that, but the person who died was my dad, and I'd actually been looking after my dad for a long time. We almost become inseparable. So the loss of him, even though I've got family, brothers, sisters, etc., became very, very poignant to me because, I'd lived with him. I was the one that was there. I was the one that we lived in our house together, and it's very strange. It's odd how a house that was full of laughter and fun and laughter and happiness, and because I'd lived there all my life, had become really just bricks and mortar, because that's what happened. It just become lifeless. It become very sort of sad. So I honestly thought I was okay. I got through my mother's death in the sense of so much getting through it, but actually coping with it, because I think that anyone who's gone through any kind of bereavement, you don't just forget it. It's as painful, it's as raw, it's as real, just like it was yesterday. But as time goes on, people always say time's a healer. All it does is it makes you live with it better. That's all. But it's okay. It's fine. It goes on. But this hit me hard, and I'd done the normal things as you do. I went to see my doctor and said, I'm not sleeping. And he said, okay. He said, how's work? I said, I love work at the moment because when I'm at work, I can be a different person, which I was. I was actually becoming a different Mark at work to a different Mark when I got in, because that's the way I could cope. And this went on for a long time. However, I was then noticing different things. I was noticing things that were happening. I was noticing that I was looking at the watch maybe, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then all of a sudden, I would become quite lucid and it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'd lost all that time, which was quite worrying. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to speak to doctors, because these wonderful, all-encompassing, wonderful people with MDs at the next to their names and DR at the beginning of their names know everything. However, I thought, well, if I actually was saying I'm losing time and I don't know what I'm doing, well, this is bad. I'd not had any mental health issues at all beforehand. My life health wise and that sort of stuff was pretty mundane, and I went and saw the GP as least as possible, because not only is it the situation of going to the GP, but there's that stereotypical aspect in that box that if you're male, you don't go and see the GP. It's oh, I've got a lump or a bump or a cut or a graze. Well, if it's gone by next week, or if it hasn't gone by next week, I'll go and see the doctor. But until then, I'll just look after it myself. That's how it was. But I did speak to my GP, and my GP looked at me, and this was the exact words that person said, and said, I can't cope with you anymore. because they'd already been giving me the pills and the potions, the paroxetines and the citaloprams and those sort of things. And it got to the point of where that I actually thought, well, you know, how do you mean? He said, well, you know, sort of, if you're losing those sort of times and you're losing of memories, that sort of thing, I think we need to refer you on. And I went, right, okay. So I said, it's pretty serious. And he said, well, I don't know what it is. He said, you know, sort of, it could be anything. But the problem is that when they then referred, the times of when to be seen was, well, how long's a piece of string? So I never heard anything since. That was it. It was okay. Left that doctor's consultancy room, and I was still taking the pills and potions. And the timings of where I was losing time. Also, then I started to begin to see things. I started to smell different aromas. I also started to taste, and it was very odd. And it was again, is this right? What's happening to me? You know, sort of, I'm smelling certain smells which I know for a fact are not there. It all come up to a hub and a head where I then couldn't take it any longer, because my own internal body was actually sort of breaking down. My mind was actually sort of becoming like that little brain that I showed you earlier. It was becoming very spongy, because I couldn't take any further anything else that was happening. I was still putting on that Oscar-winning performance of going to work. I was still coming home. I was still putting on an Oscar-winning performance, speaking to my sisters and actually saying, no, everything's fine, and painting on a smile like a big clown. But then I used to get home and it used to be, oh God, what am I going to do now? You know, I used to sit on my sofa indoors and just sit in the dark. There was my dog, which I loved, absolutely adored my dog. And the dog would sit next to me, and it would be, I would be just stroking a dog, and my life become just that. Suicide, and we talk about it, and this is what really hurts me the most, even now, long time afterwards, is that I've got the background about suicide prevention, and it's okay to talk and all this. But every day is Suicide Prevention Day. Every day it's good to talk to someone. And it's always good not to be okay, because your feelings, your life, I suppose, depends on it. Because I got to such an extreme point where that I then attempted to take my own life. Now, for a long time, and I was trying to come to terms with it, I was stopped by it being completed, by the place where I went to do this particular thing. I was seen, and the person must have had some kind of thinking, thought process, whatever, and they'd actually contacted the police. The police had come and saw me, and I knew what was happening, and I thought, well, I'm not really frightened of you anymore. You know, I'm not frightened of police anyway. You know, you shouldn't have to be frightened of police, really. But I said, you know, I can't cope anymore. I can't, even you want to give me all these different things that you're going to say, you know, about that life's worth living, the platitudes of, come on, everything's can be all right. What's the other ones? The other ones are that, you know, sort of, if it's nighttime, everything always looks better in the light. Oh, I've heard them so many times. I suppose really, if you know, those old sayings that if you actually got £1 for every time that someone said that to you, you'd be a millionaire. Well, I tell you, I'd be a billionaire, trillionaire. But what happened is this police officer that I actually was looking at and thinking, right, what are you going to come out with next? Actually just come and sat next to me, and he says, listen, I'm not going to say anything to you. He says, I'm not going to say to you, don't do it. He says, because if you've got that in your head, then you're going to do it. If you're not going to do it, then you're not going to do it. He said, but just let me tell you, he said, that I've gone and visited so many people's families after a person has died by suicide. I've visited so many people whose lives have been affected, because he says, what you've got to look at it, and now I do, he says, you've got to look at it as like throwing a stone into a lake. And he says, and then when you throw that stone into the lake, he says, the ripples come out. He says, you've gone. He says, your life can't be affected any further. He says, because the lights have been turned off. He says, but the problem is I've spoken to loads of people who've actually said, but why? Where? How? Now, I was in the mindset still of actually saying, sort of, well, look, great stuff, great story. Thank you for that, pulling at the heartstrings, whatever. But then I don't know why I thought of my niece, who'd been born probably about 3-4 months beforehand. And when I held her, it was really strange because, as I said, it was my dad who died, and my dad was the patriarch of the family, the one to go to, the sort of oracle, because that's what happens in families. But he wasn't there anymore. I took on that role. I took on that particular position. And it was so inspiring because there was a new baby, a new life in the world, in our family. And I looked and I thought, would I be the story of the family of, well, Mark couldn't hack it, Mark couldn't take it, Mark got to the lowest point because he couldn't say anything to us. So I did pull back. I did go with the police. They took me there wasn't 136 suites then because it was quite a while back. So they took me to a custody suite. And the custody suite's sergeant said, listen, I'm going to get someone to come and speak to you. I'm going to get a forensic medical officer to come and speak to you. And they did. And this doctor came and said, this ain't the right place to put someone. He needs to go to A&E. So they took me to A&E. And one of the things that really still grinds with me so much was that, as I said to you previously, my dad had died. And of course, he died in hospital. And the quiet room where they put me when they told me my dad had died, when it happened, because the A&E department never had no areas to put anyone because, that's the way A&Es are. It's all physical health in the mainstay now. They put me in that quiet room again. And I sort of sat there, and even though it hurt because I thought, all of a sudden I went right back to that time. I thought to myself, no, what would he do? And that's where it all started. That's where I then had a long period of time in hospital. Lots of people talk about things like diagnosis, those sort of things there. The psychiatrist that I got didn't believe in diagnosis. She believed that we need to deal with things day by day, week by week, month by month. And funny enough, as they always do, after a period of time, they move on. You get to a new psychiatrist and whatever. And it was just by overhearing, it was that my diagnosis was bipolar. And I also had psychotic tendencies. And I thought to myself, oh dear, sounds wonderful, because of course they didn't use the word bipolar then. It was manic depression. So it was manic depressive illness with psychosis. And I saw this new psychiatrist and I thought, there's no hope for me, is there? Because I really honestly thought that I was like Norman Bates sitting there. And they went, no, it's the words, this is where it is. And this is where we've come to, because I think that we're sitting in a room talking about suicide prevention. We're in Suicide Prevention Month. As I said, I never had any issues with mental health prior to when my issues and troubles started. So I've actually worked over the last 20 odd years by trying to destigmatize and demystify the myths and stories and the issues that people are not Norman Bates. People are going through the worst possible times of their lives. People have their brain and it's squidgy and it can cope with some things and it can't cope with others. And also we've got to use those brains to actually gear into our mouths as well. So our mouths need to start using different language. The amount of times that I've heard professionals say about that person has committed suicide, that person committed this, rather than they died by suicide or they attempted to take their life, is astounding. So what I do now is I work with some NHS trusts. I work nationally with a national, in the UK, a national charity. And I try to sort of destigmatize, because that is one of the biggest things in mental health. It's that sort of word, it's those things, and also mental health. We all have mental health. It's the only time it gets an issue is because it becomes a mental illness. So when we go along and say about our mental health, be proud of our mental health, but just look at when it becomes an illness. My time is slowly going away, but I just wanted to say that I have been in situations similar, but not the same. No one, as I said at the very beginning, we're all very different. But what does bind us is that the people that are speaking have had experiences of where they have been to the lowest point of their lives. I've now changed and using that as strength to push on and actually try to help other people. Because one of the big things is that this is Suicide Prevention Month. So that means that we can prevent suicide. I'm going to stop there. And of course, we'll be having questions and all that, but thank you for letting me speak. Thank you for coming. And it's a really strange subject, but just some info and just something for you, a present from me to you today. After today's event, tonight, tomorrow, or any time over the weekend or next week, treat yourself. Give something back to you. Enjoy your head, sort of some self-care is a wonderful thing. And that's what you need, because these sort of subjects are very, very tough, very hard. And you need to give something back to yourself. So I'll go back to Monica.